Just to confirm, we do have quorum, so we can go ahead and begin the meeting.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I'm gonna hop in. It's great to see everyone. I'm board member Lily Kajabi, and we'll take a moment to have all board members introduce themselves. But first, I just want to thank everyone here for their participation today, for commitment to the RIPA board's work. I'm speaking to board members, folks from GOJ, but also especially members from the public who are here. We're all here because we share a commitment to improving the well-being of Californians. So we're here in particular for the Stop Data Subcommittee meeting, but it's part of a larger process to assess and make recommendations and address challenges and issues, regardless of our identities, too, so we can all enjoy trust, as a public in our systems. And so I thank especially board members now for launching us. So I'm going to ask each of us to introduce ourselves. Maybe I'll just start by saying I'm Lily Kajabi. I'm a professor of mathematics in the Department of Mathematics, Statistics, and Data Science at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and an appointee of the Attorney General's office. And I invite each board member to introduce themselves. I'm going to try passing it on. Board Member Randolph, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Chair. My name is Rich Randolph. I am a board member representing Porac in the state of California. I'm a police chief, Fontana Unified School District, and glad to be here with all of you. I'd like to pass it on to fellow board member Soli.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Sule Diallo. I am a supervisor at the Riverside County Public Defender's Office. I'm also on the executive board of the California Public Defenders Association, and I am the designee of the California Public Defenders Association. And with that, I will pass it to Board Member Green.
Good morning. Thank you. Captain Darren Green, California Highway Patrol. I am the designee of, I guess at the time it would have been the governor, but it's been delegated down to me from my commissioner, Sean DeRee. Glad to be here. Thank you very much. And I will pass it along to Member Dobard, please.
Good morning, John Dobard, Vice President of Policy and Programs at Catalyst California, and an appointee of Speaker Emeritus Anthony Brendan. And I will pass it to Board Member Guerrero.
Good morning, everyone. Andrea Guerrero. I'm the Executive Director at Alliance San Diego, and I am the appointee of former President Pro Tem, Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. And I think, is that all of us? Any more board members?
That's everyone that I see. If there are any other board members, could they take the moment to unmute and introduce themselves? And I think that's all of us. So it's great. It's great to see you all. I appreciate everyone's participation. So we're going to hop, as usual, to approval of the minutes. They're lengthy minutes, but we'll still take a moment, as usual, to allow folks, if they want to open up the file, and then I'll entertain motions to approve minutes. Let me just say, I don't know if others see this as well, but I see another board member is just hopping in to join us. So while folks are thinking about the minutes, we'll see. I'm going to ask a board member to introduce himself as well. So I'm going to ask, as Board Member Smith, I don't know if you're here. I saw that you might be entering.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, I will be on camera in just a moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. We can hear you, and be happy to see your beautiful face. But may I ask you, we were just doing introductions. If you can hear me and want to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, this is Chauncey, Catalyst California appointee of Attorney General Bonta. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So we're taking a look at the minutes from our last board meeting, subcommittee meeting rather. And if there are any corrections or comments, that is amendments or corrections to the minutes, we can entertain those, or otherwise a motion to approve the minutes.
Board Member Randolph, I make a motion to approve.
Anyone want to second that motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Board Member Green.
All right, so we have a motion on the table to approve the minutes as written. And I'll go through alphabetically for board members' approval. Member Diallo.
I'm going to abstain as I was unfortunately absent last meeting.
Member Diallo abstains. Member Dobard.
Aye.
Member Dobard votes aye. Member Green.
Aye.
Member Green votes aye. Member Guerrero.
Aye.
Member Guerrero votes aye. Member Kajabi.
Aye.
Member Kajabi votes aye. Member Randolph.
Aye.
Member Randolph votes aye. And Member Smith.
Aye.
Member Smith votes aye. All right, the motion carries and the minutes are approved.
Great, thank you so much. So just look at my agenda. We are going to move to updates from the California DOJ. We now have a draft of the data, the section for this year's, looking ahead to this year's report that's specific to the data subcommittee, although I'll mention that the policies subcommittee draft and that subcommittee will be meeting on its own, I believe next week, also has sections that will engage with the data, but our goal today, first and foremost, is to look at the section of the draft which is provided by DOJ, and we're going to start that with a presentation from DOJ. So I invite DOJ members who will be leading us. Thank you so much. I invite you to bring us through the draft in any way that you'd like.
Hello. I never know if other folks from the DOJ are going to do an introduction, but I will jump in because I have a lot to share. Let me share my screen here. And we'll go into presentation mode. And I will assume that you can see my screen because we've been doing Zoom meetings for years and it's never failed before. But it is always disorienting that I can't see the crowd while talking. And so feel free to speak up if there are any issues. And we will have time for questions at the end. My name is Eric Van Holm. I am a research data specialist with Research Services at the Department of Justice, and I'm the lead researcher on RIPA, although I work with an amazing team who has helped prepare what we have to share today. I'm excited to be here to present a more in-depth look at the data that will be in the Stop Data draft, which you have a draft of. There will be some overlap with what I shared on July 11th, but given the time we have today, there will be much more depth. There will be three principal sections of this presentation. First, for each demographic group, I'll describe the number of stops taken, the most common actions taken, and the rate of various results of stops. I'll then review a few intersectional analyses with the interplay of language or housing status on issues of race. And finally, I'll give an introduction to the interstop co-occurrences analysis. As a brief review of the data, in 2024, we have over 5 million stops reported by 533 agencies across the state. With those stops, officers collect various demographics, which I will break down our data by throughout this presentation, specifically race, gender, age, disability, English fluency, sexual orientation, and their housing status. Before we launch into this, though, I want to warn you, I have a lot to share. So to some degree, I will go quickly through a lot of these slides, highlighting what I think are the most salient points. We don't have time to talk about every single data point, but a lot of these demographic analyses that we begin with do not differ from prior years. And I'm trying to sort of save time at the end for sort of a more complex analysis that might need further discussion. But so with that note, we can begin. So to start, we have the average number of actions taken during a stop. As we see, when considering all stops, Blacks have the most average actions on average with 0.94. They are closely followed by Native Americans at 0.93. And both of those are above average across the data, and the average is 0.63 actions per stop. At the other end of the distribution, Asian and Middle Eastern, South Asian have the fewest stops on average, 0.21 and 0.26, respectively. However, looking at all stops in the data impacts the way that this distribution looks. If we look only at stops that feature at least one action, the difference between racial groups are somewhat muted, though still present. So in stops with at least one action, Black individuals on average have 2.3 actions taken. On the other hand, Middle Eastern, South Asian have 2.33. So the gap from the highest to the lowest shrinks from about 0.7 actions per stop down to 0.5. And so there's still a difference present, but it is somewhat less. Now looking at the specific actions taken during a stop by race and ethnicity, we have 4 types of actions listed: asked parole status, detained, handcuffed, and search. There are commonalities across races. For instance, being asked your parole status is the least frequent action for all 4 for each racial group. And that'll be consistent across all of the graphs. Blacks and Natives American, Black and Native Americans have the highest rates for each action, which is consistent with the earlier graphs and findings. So that I heard a voice there. For instance, in 19% of stops, Blacks and Native Americans are searched, roughly. And in contrast, that occurs for 3.61% of stops for South Asians. And so we do see significant larger differences in terms of the actions that are taken, along with their frequencies. And so this is the final slide on race and ethnicity alone. When we see the results of stops across racial groups, warnings are fairly evenly distributed across each group. But we see wide differences in the likelihood of receiving a citation versus an arrest. While Asian and Middle Eastern individuals are the most likely to receive a citation, they are the least likely to be arrested. And in contrast, nearly a quarter of stops of Native Americans result in an arrest. And so this will, I'll run through all of the demographics with sort of the same pattern. And so we'll review each group in turn. So we now turn to gender. The average number of actions between stops when considering all stops is highest for transgender men and women with very similar figures, 1.02 and 1.03. And so on average, a stop for a transgender man or a transgender woman has one action. Cisgender men are also above the 0.63 average at 0.7, while cisgender women have the lowest number of average actions taken. However, when only looking at stops with at least one action taken, cisgender men are the only group with a total above the average for all groups, for all at least one action. Transgender men boys have slightly more actions on average than transgender women girls, and cisgender women girls have the fewest actions during stops with at least one action, with only 2.41. Looking at actions taken, transgender men and women are more likely to have all 4 actions occur during a stop. Transgender women and girls are more likely to be detained and handcuffed, while transgender men and boys have higher rates of parole requests and search. We observe sort of 3 steps here, with cisgender women being the least likely to have actions taken, cisgender men and non-binary individuals having similar rates of each action, and a higher level for transgender men and women. Finally, we review the results of stops broken down by gender. Focusing first on arrests, 9.88% of stops result in an arrest for cisgender women. That figure grows to 13.34 and 14.08 for cisgender men and non-binary people, and increases still to nearly a quarter of stops for transgender men and women. There's a reverse pattern across citations, where cisgender women have the highest rates of citation, and at the other end of the distribution, transgender men and women are the least likely. Warnings are less uniformly distributed, though transgender women and men have the highest rates. Shifting to age now, we can see large differences across different age bands. Young individuals, those specifically between 10 and 17, have the highest average number of stops when looking at all stops. Those between 25 and 44, which is 2 bands combined, also have a higher number than average. However, few stops occur for those under 18. Those above 65 have the fewest actions taken when considering all stops. When we look instead at stops with at least one action, we see that those between 25 and 44 have the highest average for actions taken, coming in at about 2.76 and 2.8, similar figures. Those younger than 8 have the lowest averages at 2, even when considering just stops with at least one action. Looking at the results of stops, youths between 10 and 17 stand apart from other age categories. When a stop is of a minor over the age of 10, there is a greater chance that the stop will end in detainment, handcuffing, or search. Those percentages tend to be double those for adults. There aren't great differences among adults, although there is a small rise into mid-adulthood and then a slow decline past the age of 45. And those over 65 have the lowest rates amongst all age groups. Finally, we look at results of stops by age group. If we focus on arrests, the path across age groups matches actions fairly closely, with a rise between 25 and 44, and then a decline into adulthood. Arrest follows actions fairly closely here. Moving to disability status, we see here both the average number of actions taken across all stops and those where at least one stop was taken. We can do both at the same time with fewer categories. Individuals with a disability are far more likely to have an action as part of a stop, as indicated by the average, which is nearly 3 times as high across all stops. Though when only considering stops with an action, they have the same exact average. And so what this is sort of indicating is that those that are disabled are far more likely to have actions taken, though within a stop with actions, there is less of a difference, but that the non-disabled are less likely to have a stop with actions taken. The actions taken happen at a much higher rate for those with a disability, right? As we could infer from the earlier slide. Being detained, handcuffed, and searched occurs in more than 3 times as many stops. And so being disabled indicates that there's a greater chance of having actions taken. Finally, while those that are perceived as being disabled have warnings occur at a far lower frequency, they are arrested more than twice as much, and nearly 1/3 of stops for the disabled result in an arrest, just under 1/3, 29.03%. Turning now to sexual orientation, we see that while those perceived to be part of the LGBT+ community have a higher average number of actions across all stops.
Excuse me, Eric, I just had a question for you real quick. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yes.
On the actions, you keep talking about actions. Can you outline for all of us on the actions? What's an action in this report? I have 3 questions on that.
Okay. Let me go back a slide. Okay, so what your question is, what counts as an action or what's being included?
Yeah, what's being counted as you keep saying action. What counts as an action in this report?
Well, these are actions as indicated in the stop report of whether there's, I think, about 25 different actions that can be taken. But this is being, if you're asked to search, whether you're being searched together, whether all force actions, which would include things like handcuffing. This is kind of a subset of those different actions and what percentages of stops feature at least one of those boxes being checked. And so during the stop where you asked your parole status, that is an action that can be taken. Were you detained? Were you handcuffed? Were you searched?
Got it. Okay. And the other question I had on the disability, Is that perceived as could it be anyone that they say I've got a disability, I've got ADHD, I mean, because it could be taken any disability be taken anyway, right? And it's also going to be perceived, right? We're not going
Yes.
to ask a motorist. I don't think cops in the state are going to ask, do you have a disability? Obviously, if it's visible, I understand the officer would document that. But a perceived disability would mean like, I mean, what I'm concerned about is it says disability status, sexual orientation. All the cops in the state that should be perceived, it should be listed perceived, correct? Thank you.
Yes.
I see Andrea nodding her head. Andrea, I'm sorry. It looks like you're going to ask that question too. I apologize.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should preface all of this at the outset that all of the demographics are based on perception. That all of the demographics that are being listed and indicated in the report on a stop are based on the officer's perceptions. And so did they perceive that the individual is disabled? And there are different ways to ascertain that. You know, some disabilities are quite visible, others are more hidden, and we know that perceptions are flawed. And so all of this is based upon perception. So did a officer perceive someone to be white versus black? Did they perceive them to be a part of the LGBT plus community? Did they perceive them to have a disability, which includes mental and physical disabilities? Did they perceive them to be unhoused? All of this is based on officer perception, which changes what the data is. It's not, in a way, it's more a reflection of how the officer's perceptions may impact a stop. But it also, in some ways, we hope, reflects the status of the individual.
Thank you for clarifying that. So technically it should say disability status perceived, right? Because it looks like we're putting information out that officers in the state are going out and it's all disability. It should be perceived.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And that's a note that could be added to every slide.
Yeah, I would suggest, Eric, putting it into the title of the slide, because this is a constant source of confusion. And I really appreciate Board Member Randolph like raising the question, because you know, if someone were to just like take this slide on its own, it would create confusion. And you know, we are agnostic as to whether it's actual disability. So Eric, I would just be cautious about putting out there that we hope it's the right perception, right? Or that the perception aligns with the actual thing, because that's not our mandate as an advisory board or as a body, right? And then I had a follow-up question regarding the search and Terry frisk category. Can you say more about what that is? Because that could be a lot of things. Because we track consent-based searches, you know, no consent searches. I'm not sure what that category is.
Right. Yes. That's a great question. So search is including any type of search that occurs. All of it is bundled together.
Okay. So, you know, this body has, in the past, spent a lot of time thinking about consent-based searches versus other kinds of searches, evidence or intelligence-based searches. And I think it would be very, very helpful to us to disaggregate those. And maybe that's done somewhere else. But it's really important, like first, I really appreciate the clarity, the visual clarity of this data. It's much better than we've done in the past. But I think, and I also appreciate, you know, the kind of life cycle understanding of the data and what might happen in the course of a stop. But it is really important for us to disaggregate consent-based searches versus other things, because that alone is discretionary and the other things might not be.
Absolutely. And if in the future you'd like to have us back to discuss that, we can further break out these graphs. You know, with so many different actions, you know, it does become a question of how fine grained do we want it to be.
Yeah,
And
that particular question though, Eric, you
Yeah.
know, is one that we've spent a lot of time on as a body. And so somewhere in this data, we need to disaggregate it because we've made recommendations about it. You know, lawmakers ask about it. And,
Mhm.
you know, without us breaking it down in one of these charts, then the burden is on the public, you know, the lawmakers, the law enforcement, to you know, download the data, like get
Right.
somebody to crunch it, and you know, when they might not have the capacity or the know-how to do all that. And so that particular issue of consent-based versus non, as a subject that we have spent a lot of time on as a body, should be disaggregated somewhere in this report.
Absolutely. And so I will differentiate that in the report, and I believe it's in the policy section. We do talk about those two things separately, discretionary
Yes.
versus non-discretionary.
And I just want to make
Um,
sure we have data graphs that go along with that, because we've done a lot of talking about it and we've been inconsistent about using data graphs to explain the numbers.
Absolutely. It's a really valuable point, and something that in future presentations we can make note of.
So may I interject? Board Member Randolph, I saw your hand up too. I don't know if you'll have an additional comment, but I'm just, can I jump in for a moment? And then I didn't want to, I thought I saw your hand, so I don't want to miss you. But so I just want to reiterate what we heard, because everything we're talking about here informs the report. So one was the observation that all of these categorizations are based on officer perception. That's so important. That's what we're interested in capturing. And the report at times, you know, will say perceive, perceive, perceive. And even if it might feel very wordy to do that, you know, Eric, I invite you, there was the concrete idea of still putting it into the slide title so that everyone can, you know, if someone's looking, know how to interpret them. And it may feel wordy, but it's technically correct. And it's not actually capturing the population at large. It's really, this is officer perception. So, and thank you, board members, for raising specifically that. I also heard the comment that action taken is such a large bin. What does it mean? In the report, so I was just peeking back. There is a very lengthy footnote because there's so many sort of checkboxes that can correspond to that. From asking for consent to a search to, I see, for example, use of chemical spray. So some of these are obviously very infrequent actions, some of them more frequent. And I think the point that was raised means that within the report, even though the footnote is very explicit, we want to think about ways that for someone looking at the report or looking at slides, it's very clear what these refer to. So it's not going to mean repeating that whole footnote every time. But maybe I'm thinking ahead, especially to if we have an executive summary or we choose a couple of findings to illuminate, that the term action taken becomes a shorthand, but it's not one that's always clear to all of us and clear to the public. And so I'm sort of saying out loud that we think about within the report, I guess it goes to DOJ, ways to really elevate the information's in the report, but way to make it very clear. I especially liked, I think it's actually on page 3, there's a companion to the footnote. It actually says which of the actions taken are by far the most common. And so searches, Terry frisks, handcuffing, detention, and asking about parole status. And Eric, I think you referred to those ones, but I'm just reiterating because I think this is such an important comment. So I guess I'm saying the suggestion is we find ways to make it very as clear as possible. And also, so folks know which actions are most common. And then I heard the comment about the search categories, that includes everything from Terry frisk and other very discretionary searches like consent searches to ones that might maybe as a function of arrest if someone's being searched. And we really need it both ways. We need the searches counted overall, if you will, but also the focus on consent. And I do appreciate that the policy section, this year, the policy section is where some of that will live, but I really want to emphasize, echo, amplify the comment that consent is a particular interest to us because it's actually an area where law enforcement, we've had agencies come in and talk about changing their approaches to that. I don't know if other board members have comments, but also Eric, I know you were on a roll. Should we pivot back to the presentation? Okay, and thanks DOJ for listening in on all of these. I know we'll have discussion time as well.
Okay, thank you all for the valuable comments. We've made note of them. Let me know if I believe I did this slide. And so let me know if I have jumped ahead or fallen behind myself. I believe this is where we left off. Turning to sexual orientation, we see that that being perceived as part of the LGB plus community leads to having a higher number of actions across all stops. But when only looking at stops featuring at least one action, the figure is nearly identical. Individuals perceived to be part of the LGB plus community are 1.5% more likely to be asked their parole status as part of the stop. They are roughly 8 percentage points more likely to be detained, handcuffed, and searched. There's kind of a consistent gap across those different actions. It's roughly 8 percentage points, regardless.
May I ask?
Yes.
I just asked as a point of information, I'm trying to remember, are these slides then uploaded also? And I know they're part of our video now, and I really appreciate it. It's just a lot of descriptive statistics. We just got to go through it, Eric, so thank you. But are these slides also uploaded to the RIPA site?
Yes.
And
I believe they will be posted today. We got a little bit behind because we're adding the ADA compliance and the alt text for all of these, but they are planned to be posted today.
So then actually I want to make a formal request. Maybe this is a board vote that perceived is inserted here. So for example, this is perceived sexual orientation, perceived disability status.
For each title, yes.
Yeah. So that these are correct as possible and reflect the, the concerns that were raised. And I know there are a lot of slides, but hopefully this feels, after lots of data crunching, that this one isn't as heavy a lift. It just is what it is. Thank you.
Adding one word is not too significant a haul after everything. And so yes, we will work to make that part of the final posted slides.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Here we see the rates of various results of stops across perceived sexual orientation. Those perceived as being LGB plus are more likely to be arrested as part of a stop, and it occurs nearly twice as often, while they have lower rates of citation and warning as a result of stop than individuals that are perceived as being heterosexual. We shift to housing status now. Whether an individual is perceived as having housing or not was added to the forms this year. And so we start by just giving an overview of that data. In 2024, 3.58% of stops were recorded as involving an unhoused person. And that's in contrast to 96.42% of stops, which were of people that were housed. And we're going to actually compare this to English language fluency as sort of a contrast to anchor sort of the differences in that housing makes. And as shown, the unhoused are far more likely to have actions as part of a stop. We see that among all stops, those that are perceived as being unhoused are nearly 4 times, have nearly 4 times as many actions taken compared for all stops. The difference that language fluency makes is far smaller. It's only 0.12 percentage higher, although that is a difference that language makes. When we look at only stops where there is at least one action, the unhoused, the difference shrinks. The unhoused are still more likely have more actions taken on average, 2.77, although those with limited English fluency actually have a higher average number of stops of actions taken in stops when there's at least one action, 2.81.
Eric, I see a board member with a hand raised. So
yeah,
please.
Sorry, Eric, can you clarify? I don't recall right now. Is perceived housing status a data point that officers are asked to capture, or is that being determined in some other way?
This is a new data element. Oh, sorry.
It's a data element?
It's a new one.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Some
Okay,
officers
all right.
are recording their perception of the housing, and that's a new
Okay.
element for 2024.
Okay, great, new, yes, got it, thank you.
So looking just at housing status, we'll kind of go back and forth with language fluency. But here we look at housing to see the actions that are taken during a stop. We know from the prior slide that the unhoused are more likely to have actions during a typical stop, and that is reflected in all 4 actions displayed, where each action occurs at roughly 4 times the rate for the housed community. Nearly half of stops of the unhoused end in a detainment, and 43% feature a search or just to call out 2 of the numbers. And so we see how many more actions occur in those stops. How do the stops end for the unhoused community or the perceived unhoused? Very often an arrest. While 11.13% of stops for the housed population result in arrest, 47.32% of stops of the perceived unhoused result in an arrest. While nearly half of stops result in a citation for the housed, only 7.3%, 7.32% do so for the unhoused. In some ways that, that reflect the nature of being being unhoused without a permanent address or a steady income. Citations are sort of more complicated, but they're less likely to be stopped for a moving violation. But we see sort of significant differences in the result of stops. We shift back to English fluency. With language, we see differences, but smaller than what we observed for the unhoused. For all 4 actions, those with limited or no English fluency or perceived as having no English fluency have higher rates, though these differences range from 0.07 percentage points for asking parole to 2 percentage points for handcuffing. So far, smaller differences. Stops have different results based on language skills as well. Those with limited and no English fluency have a slightly higher rate of receiving a warning and arrest, roughly 2 percentage points in both cases. But on the other hand, their stops result in a citation by roughly 0.5 percentage points more often. So that ends the discussion of statistics broken down just sort of by single demographics. But we have 2 slides of the intersectional analyses, which were requested. And we'll show first the percentage of stops for each race and ethnicity group that involved unhoused individuals. Within each race ethnic group, or each perceived race ethnicity, the highest rate of stops for those perceived to be unhoused was for Black individuals. 5.42% of stops of Black people or perceived Black people were of those that were perceived to be unhoused. 4.99%, 5% of stops of white individuals were perceived to be unhoused. And at the other end of the spectrum, only 0.72% of stops for Middle Eastern or South Asian individuals were perceived to be unhoused. And so we see some distribution of the perceived race of those perceived to be unhoused.
Eric, I don't know if you can see,
Yes.
but we have a board member with hand raised. And
I can't see anything. So
Oh,
please,
okay, great.
call it
Board Member
out whenever.
Guerrero, do you want to unmute and just jump into? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, hopefully this is not too disruptive, it's just helpful to be asking in the moment. Does it make sense here to put, and throughout, to put the average lines, dashes like you had at the beginning? I think just to help the public understand or have reference points for the data. I know it always helps me to see an average, but I'm not sure if it makes sense here, but if it does, I think it would be helpful.
So can I say that I'm hearing 2 things. One is that the context of the slide, but I know you're also going to upload these slides soon. Maybe is that especially something for the report or other materials that will be distributed more broadly? Because I really appreciate that. That's a great
And it would also, and it would also help with consistency because we did it for the beginning slides. And throughout would be great.
Absolutely, that's a great note. This is the second intersectional analysis that we have, which is the final intersectional analysis. This is similar figures broken down by language. And so the percentage of those stopped from each race or ethnicity group that were perceived as having no or limited English fluency. Here, the highest rate is for Hispanic Latinx, where 11% of stops were perceived as having limited skills with English. And at the other end of the distribution, 1.52% of Blacks individual stops were perceived as having no or limited English fluency. And you can see how that kind of distributes across different racial groups. Asian and Middle Eastern, Southern Asian were the second most likely to be perceived as not speaking English fluently. Okay. So now this is the final aspect of the presentation that we're going to shift to, which, as you've already done, feel free to ask any questions as I'm going. This will be perhaps a little bit more dense in some ways. This analysis is a little bit more complicated. This is a board requested analysis. The board wanted to understand the relationship between different actions and the progression of stops from beginning to end. And as we said at the time, unfortunately, we do not have the ordering of actions taken within a stop. We do not know which action occurs first, which action occurs second. We just simply know that some number of actions occurred. But we could divide a stop into 3 steps, because there is a beginning of a stop, there are actions taken, and then there is a result of stop. And at the beginning of the stop, the individual's perceived demographics and the reason for stop exist. This stop proceeds, and then there is a result. And unfortunately, I don't have time today to review all of the findings of this analysis, but I can go over a portion of them. And if you would like to invite us back to talk more in more depth, I would love to share more of what is in this section. We began by looking at the relationship between different actions taken. The chart on the screen shows the correlations between different actions, with the strength and direction indicated by the color. The same name appears on the top and side, and so where the names meet across the board is the correlation between those 2 variables. And so because the same name appears on the top and side, where the same action meets, the correlation is 1, as indicated by the dark blue horizontal stripe in the middle. All actions were included, though some were collapsed into bundles to reduce the noise of the graph. So for instance, asking for consent at the bottom includes different types of search that an officer could ask about. And many of the correlations are logical. For instance, there is a strong positive correlation between asking for consent and receiving consent. Of perhaps more interest, we see a moderate positive correlation between force and search, meaning that in stops with actions, if force occurs, if force is used, there is a greater chance that search will also occur. Those 2 things correlate positively. That does not predict what order that they occur, just that the 2 tend to co-occur within a stop.
I'm sorry, Eric, can you go back
Yes.
for one moment? And I know
Sure.
we'll also see this graph in the draft, but I just want to emphasize. So you said this showing relationship between one action having and another. Are they more likely to both happen within a stop? And you said that in like a positive correlation, but then I see on this, I just want to understand the scale while we're all together. So variables that are less likely to happen, actions that are less likely to happen during the same stop are in the fainter blue.
Yes.
I'm just thinking out loud as I realized I saw this in the report, but I wasn't thinking about it as closely. There's something a little funny to me about shading both positive and negative correlations somehow in the same coloring. Although on the other hand, if 2 things are close to 0, they're close to being unrelated. Whether they're a little positive or a little negative maybe is a distinction without difference. So I guess this is something I'm going to invite board members to look back at, either at this meeting or later, for us to think about ways to represent what you're trying to capture here visually, a lot of information at once. I really appreciate your comments about collapsing categories. That helped me better understand too.
Mhm.
But I want us to think about how to capture this formal idea of co-occurrence, but also with the intuition of what a coloring can share. Because when I look at something like this, of course, like the dark blue jumps out right away, but that's sort of just telling us, as you said, on each axis, if something happens, it happens. Like it's not, the dark blue isn't revealing of a connection between things except a default one, if you will. But somehow
Right.
the light blues, I don't know if what I'm saying makes a little sense. I want us to think about how, if this is some kind of color coding, if it's allowing us then to see the things that are most important or and possibly impacting policy recommendations. Okay, so this isn't a concrete recommendation, but just maybe a footnote to come back.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
single color was
Sorry.
chosen in part because of ADA compliance. And so
Yeah.
we'd have to figure out ways to make sure that we're meeting, the
Yeah, no, I
interest
appreciate it.
of communication and
maybe what I'm saying comes out in the I haven't had as much chance to really delve into the narrative of the report, but okay, I know we want to hop on, but I do see Board Member Guerrero, so did you want to share something? Thank you.
Yes, Eric, I'm wondering whether we need to disaggregate search, the category searched or frisked. And I'm just trying to make sense of this because I see like horizontally, you have asked for consent. Sorry, you have, asked for consent. Well, we know that in the intersection of asked for consent and consent is, virtually everybody is consenting, right? That's consistent with what we know from past reports, right? And so they're consenting to a search, but when you look at ask for consent or consent horizontally with the intersection of searched or frisked, it's not strong blue 1, right? Which raises questions like, if we have virtually everybody consenting to a search, does that mean even though they consented, some people are not being searched? Or is the, lighter blue, and it's like 2 notches down lighter blue, or a couple notches down lighter blue, is that a function of the aggregation of searched or frisked? And if that's the case, then we should disaggregate those again for the reason that that's of particular concern to this body. It should be, this is just a cross check on how we're thinking about the data, but my guess, tell me if there's an instance where somebody's consented to a search and they're not searched, but I would anticipate that would be strong blue.
Right. And so the few people are likely asked for consent and not searched. But there are people that are searched without consent and which is partially gets to what you're asking. And so there may be ways to break out some of this data more finely and add a few more rows, a few more boxes to capture those kind of specific relationships. If that both gets at the intuition.
And also just to check on your data, because I don't know how the intersection of consent and search is anything but the strongest blue, given the intersection of ask for consent and consent.
So I suspect what's behind the scenes here too is if there was a variable here, an action of I'll call it consent only based search. So searches where consent was the only basis, then we would see these very strong relationships. And then our separately searches where consent that included consent, And on the other hand, the searched or frisked is including searches where maybe probable cause of some sort was checked off, but consent wasn't sought. And maybe we're going to see, and this will come out in the policy section, that there are some agencies that you are using consent as just a matter of course, and often asking for consent when in fact there might have been some other basis for a search, as sort of imposing a Fourth Amendment waiver, if you will, in stops. And then other agencies that aren't doing that. And then so it's sort of muddying the data, as being pointed out, by having this mega searched or frisked category.
And I think that's all true, but given that we have a data line that is consented or asked for consent, whether there was an additional factor, what we do know is that from this and other data is that people who are asked for consent. Yeah. And unless you tell me otherwise, they're always searched. So Eric, I would just suggest you cross-check the data to make sure that this is showing up right. And like just as a test, like ask the data, like, why would this be that this is, significantly less blue for the intersection of consent and search, given what we know.
Right.
I think I saw Board Member Smith's hand as well flash up, but I'm not sure. Apologies.
Thank you, Lily. I'm going to ask a question on a different topic, so I would just want to create space in case Eric wants to respond.
John C., I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing you. Can you kind of really lean into whatever mic you have there, or just say it again more loudly? Thank you.
No?
Yeah, did you want to speak up again? Maybe others heard it, but for my sake, could you repeat? Thank you.
I just want to confirm, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
But you could shout though. You could.
Topic, but I just want to create space in case Eric wanted to respond to what Board Member Guerrero.
Is it?
I'm having trouble making out what was said.
Board Member Smith, can I say? I think you said you wanted to add something to contextualize the comment, and maybe I'm going to propose. Could that become part of our discussion after the GOJ presentation? Chauncey, could you make a note to yourself? Would that be something you'd be willing to raise?
No, I'm
in our
asking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think I can. Yeah.
Give me 1 second. Hello?
Hi.
Oh, yes.
Much better. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question about a slightly different topic. And what I was saying was that I just wanted to make sure that Eric had an opportunity to respond before I asked about something different.
Sure, thank you. I mean, the sort of explanation of the week, so it's a moderate and positive correlation between search and consent. And in part, this is the ordering, because we don't have the ordering of the variables, although you can kind of assume it, that people that are asked for consent or consent to search are searched at a high rate. But not all searches occur with consent. People are frisked without consent, which weakens the correlation then. There are cases of people that do not consent, but are searched. And so those cases weaken the correlation to what you see as sort of moderate and positive. And so that's why it is not as strongly blue as other cases. And that again goes to sort of the ordering of the actions that we don't know. We assume that consent would be asked first, but when that's not present, search can still occur from various mechanisms. But that again goes to the greater point of how and when should we be breaking out consent-based search and non-consent-based search.
Thank you, Eric. So my question is, if you could clarify, this would be helpful for me. What is no force action and no non-force action mean?
It's a great question. So no force action takes me back. So no force action means that there was not any action taken with force, which is why that there is in the row with, force and no force action, there's a really negative correlation. If there is no force action taken, there won't be force. No force, means, ask your parole status, IDing the passenger. And then so no non-force action, and so no force actions relate to handcuffing, detention. And so no non-force action means that none of these non-force actions of, ask parole status occurred. And so it's kind of the inverse of the no force and force. The three of those kind of overlap in a strange way, especially when you have the double negative of no non-force. But we couldn't find a better way to describe it. And clearly, we don't have a good enough way to describe it yet on this graph.
Okay, thank you for that. So just to make it very simple, so we have the arrow next to force, and it has a a complete negative correlation with no force action. Can you just kind of break that down just to make sure we get it?
Yeah, so this is essentially like an inverse. And how that we grouped variables into force actions and non-force actions. And if a force action occurred, handcuffing, for instance, the idea that there was no force action taken becomes negative by sort of rule that if you commit a force action, you cannot commit no force actions. And so no force actions just means that no actions that take force, handcuffing, detention, occurred. And so these are different kind of groupings of the variable.
Got it.
At sort of a high level.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And so maybe this also, looking ahead to the report, means that in the narrative or some place that there's explanation or more explanation of some of these bins that have been the categorizations.
Right.
I really appreciate those questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, so that is sort of the first question of this analysis. What actions are most likely to co-occur? But there were other questions embedded in the analysis beyond understanding the co-occurrences. And the first step was to understand how the demographics and the initiation of stops change the odds of those actions being taken. Not just which actions occur, but how do the way that a stops begins and the demographics of the individual impact those actions. And there were 5 separate actions that we tested as outcomes, specifically handcuffing, search, being asked to search, force as a group category of different actions, and detainment. And the variables on the graph I show are considered independent variables, these variables listed on the left. Which we'll use to help understand what type of person and stop are more likely or less likely to have the outcome being studied occurred, which in this case is force during a stop. And force during a stop is the only of the actions that I'll be able to show today, sort of in the interest of time. Each of these variables in this list has something it's being compared to. So in the case of age, all of the age brackets are compared to the omitted category, which is people between 10 and 14. Or at the bottom, reason for stop is compared to those for reasonable suspicion. In terms of race, all of the racial groups listed are compared to whites. And what regression allows us to do is look at one variable at a time, just one variable, and compare how a stop that is for instance, officer initiated changes the odds of an outcome, holding all else constant. Or in the case of, we can talk about sort of race, that what this allows us to do is when we have a result for Asian, what we're comparing is an Asian individual to a white individual, because white is the omitted category. That is Same on all of these other categories. Is the same age, is the same demographically otherwise, has the same housing status, has the stop begin for the same reason. But we change the race. We go from Asian to white, and we look at those two people across, we have 5 million data points. And so we can find people that match and change one little thing at a time. And how does that change the odds of whatever outcome we're looking at? And for now, what the outcome that we're looking at is the use of force. And so what these bars show is the relative likelihood of force being used during a stop when changing only that thing. We're only changing the age category from 1 to 9 to 10 to 14. We're changing race one at a time, each of these rows. And so we're looking at the chances of force being used as a first set for this regression. And for today's presentation, that's the only one we have time for. But there's about 15 variables on the screen. And so I'll try to point out some that have a larger effect or sort of a more interesting effect. And I'll talk about those across a few different analyses. So for Blacks and Hispanics, holding all else constant, only changing those racial variables one at a time, we see that force is more likely to be used than for a white individual. That a person of the same age, the same sexual orientation, same language fluency, the stop begins the same way, that if that individual is Black versus white, if they are Black, it is more likely that force will be used. If they are Hispanic, it is more likely that force will be used. Looking at gender, we can see that being a cisgender female makes force less likely to be used than if you are a cisgender male, holding all else constant. And similarly, being non-cisgender makes force less likely to be used than if you are male in a stop. Also looking quickly at disability in the unhoused, if you have no disability, you are less likely to see force used. And if you are unhoused, you are more likely to see force, holding all else constant. And so for this, the outcome that we are looking at is force during a stop and action. And so this first step, we are looking at how initiation and demographics affect actions taken during a stop. But we'll keep looking sort of further within a stop. And so for this next step, we look at how the initiation and demographics impact the end of a stop, the result of stop, without including those actions. So skipping that second step, we go from initiation and demographics all the way to result of stop and look at your odds of being arrested as a result of stop.
Eric,
And generally the result, yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did see Board Member Guerrero's hand was up and I wasn't sure if it was about the first action during stop or this general moment. So let me just, I know you can't see hands, so I'm just.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Just a quick suggestion. I think it would be more readable if instead of using no disability, you stated disability. So everything would be flipped. That would, I think, make more logical sense in the way that we're thinking about whether disability has an impact or not.
I appreciate the point, and I wish I had thought of that before putting these together, because I had the same thought when thinking about how to present this. And so that's a change that we can make in the report in future versions. These graphs are taken from the section we wrote, but those changes can be made easily. So I appreciate the feedback. Right, so here we are looking at the outcome of being arrested during a stop. Generally, right, I know that nobody is holding in their mind the last graph that they saw. Typically, things are fairly consistent, right? The things that affect your likelihood of being arrested are the same things that affect your likelihood of having force used. Black and Hispanic individuals are more likely to be arrested in the same way that they are more likely to have force used, holding all else constant, only changing those variables for them. We do see a change though for a small change in terms of gender. Cisgender women, women and girls are less likely than cisgender men to be arrested during a stop. And similarly, non-cisgender, there is just no change. They have an equal chance of being arrested as a cisgender male as the result of stop, holding all else constant. In contrast to cisgender women who have a lower chance. And finally, we look at disability in the unhoused. whereas those without a disability are less likely to have force used. Those without it perceived as having a disability are more likely to be arrested during a stop, while the unhoused, who are more likely to have force used during a stop, are also more likely to be arrested. And so we see that the relationship of disability changing the direction when you look at different outcomes.
Eric, may I just point out, or Board Member Guerrero, did you just want to unmute and jump in since? Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
sorry,
Please feel free.
I don't mean to be intervening so much, but I just want to make sure we're maximizing
Mhm.
the understandability of this report.
Yes.
So for reason for stop, we have traffic, and then so that's being compared against non-traffic. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that this body has been very concerned about the difference between calls for service, which are sort of mandatory responses, and discretionary stops, which could be traffic or non-traffic related. I think it would be important for us to have in there as a category call for service versus non. And I don't know if that's just generally or if that's like a three-way disaggregation, right? Like traffic, call for service. Maybe we don't have to disaggregate. I mean, because of the amount of, I think it's like 85% of our stops, the stops that we are looking at are traffic based or something like that. It's important to like see the traffic versus not traffic, but it's also important to see call for service versus non-call for service.
Right. That's a really valuable point, and it's one of those issues of how much time and depth I had for this presentation to some degree. This could be 45 minutes on its own to fully like discuss it, and I would love to come back and talk about all this more. What I'll highlight here is that call for service is contrasted with officer initiated. So calls are either officer initiated or call for service. And we see here that if your stop is officer initiated, it is much less likely to end in an arrest. If we flip that, and if we instead included call for service and officer initiated was the omitted category, we would see that call for service increases the odds of being arrested during a stop. And so that's one of those hidden omitted categories that's harder to sort of disentangle automatically. And it's one of the difficulties with this complex of an analysis.
Okay, thank you. I totally missed the officer initiated, so my bad. But yeah, and maybe
absolutely.
This speaks to the need for if a descriptor, if it's not already there, of what each of these categories is being compared against. That would be a lengthy footnote, but a worthy footnote, so that we know that officer initiated is being compared against call for service.
Right, and there's much greater depth in the written report we have on this, where we do describe each variable. We go through the sort of construction of each one, but it gets and when we're doing sort of base demographics of looking at officer initiated calls versus calls for service by the different demographics, it's sort of easier to intuit, but those were sort of removed from this presentation in the interest of time. And so I was always worried that some things would get lost. And so I appreciate you raising the point and helping to clarify that.
Can I just add, like, this actually is pointing the pathway then, for the report itself, that even when the narrative has, as you said, Eric, limited time here, and this is a slide, a literal snapshot, even if there's some narrative discussion fleshing this out, maybe in some past reports, sometimes there's been some kind of bubble or breakout or something within the narrative that lets us see, more quickly or highlight particular points. So I hope we're all making a mental footnote to circle back to this report, because this is a great comment. And this is also something that's come from law enforcement too. I think the request to somehow like that calls for service, their own category are different. Sorry, so please go on, Eric. Thank you.
Okay, and I promised to everyone that this is the final slide. And so we are almost there. in this final regression, we look at all 2 steps together, all 3 steps. How do initiation and demographics influence actions during stop and end up in the result of a stop, which is again being arrested. And so here we have added those actions. We didn't include force because detention and handcuffed are the most common use of the force. We couldn't include force itself, but we have detention and handcuffing here in the middle or towards the bottom of the graph. And so to sort of begin, I'll highlight something that might seem really odd. The effect of being Black when taking into account all these other factors of a stop is now negative on your likelihood of being arrested. But we know that Black individuals are more likely to have force used, and show these, they are more likely to be searched, they are more likely to be handcuffed. All of the actions occur at a higher rate for Black individuals. And overall, being Black does make you more likely to be arrested, though much of that effect goes through these actions taken during a stop. And these actions occur at such a high rate for Black individuals that it soaks up a lot of the effect of race. And when we include those together, the effect actually turns negative for being Black. But it's said to sort of mediate the effect of race in this case and turn the variable negative. But overall, I'll emphasize again that being Black makes you more likely to be arrested. For gender, we see that cisgender women are essentially no different from cisgender men at being arrested when taking into account all of the actions that occur during a stop, when taking into account all of the demographics. While non-cisgender, which I'll clarify as a category that we combined transgender men, transgender women, and non-binary, because those are sort of rare instances in the data. Non-cisgender individuals are more likely to be arrested during a stop than cisgender men, taking everything into account, being detained, handcuffed, searched. And finally, looking at sort of disability and unhoused or no disability, those without a disability, despite being less likely to have force used, are more likely to be arrested, taking everything into account, holding all demographics and actions constant. And the unhoused are more likely to be arrested, taking everything into account, which was consistent across all of the different results. And so that is a snapshot of the co-occurrences analysis. I am happy to try and elucidate these further. I'm happy to come back in the future and give more detailed explanations of it. I hope that it was digestible to some degree, but this helped to sort of draw out sort of how a stop goes from beginning to end as best as we could given the data. And
Eric,
so,
yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry,
questions?
you got the question. Yeah, so thank you. We have a couple of board members, so let's continue our conversation with you.
Yes.
I saw Board Member Guerrero and then Board Member Smith.
Yeah, Eric, given that Californians perceived to be Black year over year are consistently taking the brunt of the racial profiling or the profiling here in the state, I think, and I want to propose this to our committee, but I think it would be valuable to have a dedicated chart of co-occurrences that were for the Californians perceived to be Black, against all these categories without taking out the obviously Black, because the whole thing would be for those perceived to be Black. I think that would help us better understand the like in a more granular way the impact of profiling on this highly vulnerable community.
yeah, we've struggled with this result, which, as I described, is a little bit odd. It's it's contrary to sort of what was expected. And there are different ways that we could go into depth in the report to kind of elucidate the effect. I'm still struggling to find language to use to explain to the public what the result means, because at its core, statistically, in this analysis, Blacks are more likely to be arrested. But it becomes a discussion of sort of direct and indirect effects and what the sort of role of the actions taken have on Black individuals and their likelihood of being arrested. And we're still trying to figure out, because we are aware of sort of the potential perception of what we've found.
Yeah, so what if you did a regression analysis that was Black plus demographic, these other demographics against white plus those same demographics. So for example, your regression would look like Black 1 to 9 years old, and that regression would be against white 0 to 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is raising questions and obviously needs to be explained, and that would then be like, okay, you can have some words about it, that's great, but I think another graph would be really helpful.
Okay, yeah, we will certainly continue to consider ways to best kind of explain this result and all of the results.
I'd like us to talk about this a little more, but I noticed, Board Member Smith, you had your hand up too. Did you want to?
Yes, thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
I'm just thinking about the viewpoint of the general public here, and I'm wondering, I think this is the way the data visual comes off is a little bit complicated, and I'm wondering if there's a simpler way to convey the main points here. A different form of a visual. I don't know, it's just like not my lane, but I'm posing that question to you, Eric. Are there different ways to convey the main point that could be a little bit simpler so that there's not misunderstandings? Because when I read this, as someone that's kind of, our organization is rooted in data analysis, and this comes off to me as a visual that will lead toward misunderstandings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that we wrestle with, in the creation of graphs is kind of one step to try and make it more sort of visually digestible, but there are obviously limitations to that. There are ways to create, you could imagine infographics that maybe break things down by different demographics and show, the likelihood of different actions taken and the way that those actions lead to results of stops. But that's kind of a further step that, we can begin to explore now, having completed the analysis, right? Up to this point, we've been doing the analysis, and now we kind of have time to think about how can we best display the results, explain the results, show the results in a way that's both digestible and accurate and informative. We obviously don't want the results to be misleading in any way. That's always our highest priority. And so we are thinking of ways that we can take this and make it more understandable for the public, for everybody.
Thank you, Eric.
Can I ask then, more specifically here? So am I understanding, and I know you already shared this, but for example, when you slice by age, in general, people sort of, how should I put it, like age out of the impact of law enforcement, but it's nationally, in particular for Black drivers, Black pedestrians, policing is still heavier and into the middle age and beyond. And so are you saying that, so I'm thinking now about this particular you were flagging, does it look like there's this negative impact racially when that's counter to are you saying that's an artifact of the age groups aren't proportional, like of 55 and 64-year-olds who are stopped? Is that disproportionately in particular Black men? And so therefore this sort of stronger weighting to that, is that a piece of the puzzle?
We haven't looked at sort of the effect of each variable on Black. The kind of key story, and if I can go back, right, when we don't include the actions taken during a stop, the relationship of Black to being arrested is positive. That Black individuals are more likely to be arrested. It's the sort of change of the variable comes when we include all of those actions. And so being handcuffed kind of has a different effect on Blacks than other racial groups. Being searched has sort of this other effect. And there are ways to statistically tease that out. The issue there, going back to the other comment, is that gets, the worry there is sort of the level of complication in explaining this. And so, you know, we don't want to, we're trying to tease out those two things of how to keep this result as digestible as possible while making an explanation of this kind of result. And there are additional analyses we can include, which could go into appendices that further test this out and do help to elucidate that Black individuals are more likely to be arrested. That what really affects that is the sort of actions being taken, because Black individuals are handcuffed so much more often than other individuals. That has a lot, that soaks up a lot of the effect, because being handcuffed is highly correlated with being arrested. That's why those two analyses separately look so similar.
So I think then inadvertently, then this representation is, I mean, as was pointed out, as you shared, and as other board members have flagged, is inadvertently distorting how people can understand the impact of race and identity relative to how we experience policing.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it is a concern that we have, that we are still trying to figure out how best to clarify.
Okay, and so in particular, so you know, I appreciate the idea of this model that's now going to look at you know, the sort of the shorthand of co-occurrences, but we don't want it to be at the expense of the, you know, the clarity or what the actual experience of Californians is. So, and I appreciate, I mean, you raised that yourself when you flagged that graph. Well, I thank you for this presentation. In terms of our agenda, what we'd like to do as a subcommittee now is, you know, share ideas, suggestions, really with an eye to this part of the report. But I was wondering if anyone from DOJ wanted to say a little bit about the fact that the policy section has rich interaction with the other data analysis. And it's already been raised by some, you know, board members' interest in looking, especially, for example, how consent is used. I don't know if it's possible to just mention some of the topics that might be in the policies section, if that's going to influence our discussion, or does anyone from DOJ want to weigh in?
Thank you for that, Co-Chair Kajabi. Oh, go ahead, Garrett.
No, yes, you may be more familiar, so go ahead, Yasmin.
I just wanted to reiterate Co-Chair Kajabi's statement. So the policies meeting, which is scheduled for next week, there is a draft that has been circulated to board members and will be posted publicly in the next day or so. And that does contain data analysis based on the stop data as well. I will put a list of the topics in the chat for you, but we do have essentially the eye of the policy section is focusing on how disparities in the 2024 stop data may inform policies that could impact racial and identity profiling as well as public safety.
Right. And ideally, of course, the whole enterprise we're up to is a chance to inform or change or improve policy, law enforcement practice. So my understanding is that, because there are many topics that come up both in data and policy subcommittee, that especially the way that consent is used and how that might vary across the state, so that the policy section might look in particular at consent, at regional distinctions. And also, I don't know offhand, but perhaps longitudinal, there have been some requests to look at now over time, because we've had RIPA data collection happening for many years, especially for the larger agencies, getting a longitudinal sense of things. I'll also say at the beginning, maybe we'll pivot to discussion of this report, at the beginning of the stop data section, in the very first section, or section A, there's a reference to the fact that the elements of the stop include not only what initiates a stop, I'm looking at some language here now, like call for service versus officer initiated, but also items like duration of stop. And duration of stop isn't, I think, addressed in the stop section, but may come up in the policy section. And so, so either the introduction, perhaps the introduction of the stop data section this time should include language that even starts to point people to the policy section as well. We can circle back to that. So I'd like to open up our time to comments, reflections, discussion from the board. It can tie directly to what we've already heard. It can tie directly to language of the report. We just recently received these drafts, so I don't know how deep into going through them everyone is. But can I open it up? Does anyone want to share any comments or reflections for our meeting based on either the presentation? Thank you so much, DOJ folks, for that, or the draft that we've received. And so I'll just start. I'm going to launch by making a general suggestion. I'd like to hear what others think. That the reports, they're lengthy narratives, and then in some years the DOJ has used some kind of, like, I'll call it like a bubble or something that breaks out. So something different than the narratives, the footnotes, the graphs, but also something that kind of draws the reader's eye. And based on the points I heard raised today, I wonder if that might be helpful, not for every section, but maybe are there a few sections where there's a finding of particular note, or a finding that could point to policy recommendations that we could break out in that way. An example is I see, for example, on page 2 of the report, key terms, call for service, officer initiated. So something so that a reader can quickly see a distinction. So an example might be that the search and Terry frisk category is very large. Maybe that's something where not only in the narrative, but there's some kind of breakout so someone can understand when those are combined. So I guess this is a general comment that if there are any places where a table or a footnote or a breakout bubble could be illuminating, that so much work is done into crafting this excellent draft, that if there's a judgment that might highlight something, that I'd invite that. I haven't made a list of where I think particular places where I think that might be most helpful, but I hope that comment, the spirit of that is conveyed. Do others want to, as we start to go through more specific points, does anyone else want to share or elaborate on points that were made? And I'm disinclined to call on people, but can I do it? Board Member Guerrero, you in particular, I see you put some comments into the chat earlier, and you'd raised points about consent. I wonder, do you want to, amplify some of those? Can I invite you to if you'd like to? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I do want to just underscore the importance of breaking out. They're disaggregating information about consent-based searches, disaggregating the search and Terry frisk category, because and then I just had put a comment in the chat about perhaps it would be helpful to have a breakout box in the report, maybe with 2 columns showing what in the regression analysis, what we're comparing against. I agree with Board Member Chauncey Smith that regression analysis is not like something that the public commonly understands. I barely understand it myself. So if there is an alternative, that'd be great. If this is the best way to show that, then a breakout box explaining it a little bit better would be, in plain terms, would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, so I heard within that in particular for the regression, if, yeah, whatever analyses are here, but including the regressions that there, maybe that's a place to even use a breakout box with a key finding or key observation. So the breakout boxes don't have to summarize everything, but they'll just allow people to see more very clearly what the upshot, some of the regressions were. Something else that came up earlier was separating discretionary and non-discretionary stops. And maybe that's a breakout bubble that's already in that key terms, call for service versus officer initiated, but then maybe that means with the data analysis at some point that separating discretionary and non-discretionary stops is a way to highlight or focus the reader's eye. Are there other comments related to the draft? I know the draft, there's a lot to digest here, but I don't know if anyone had even any initial thoughts. Oh, Board Member Green, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand earlier.
That's okay. Thank you, and good morning again. I think part of the breakout bubble, perhaps like what Yasmin put in the chat, like for the policies section, there's demographic disparities in Terry stops and frisks, comparison of stop duration. Perhaps in maybe some of those breakout bubbles, we can reference where you can kind of get a deeper dive into that data. Since it's not in stop data, I guess the assumption could be it doesn't exist, but perhaps it does exist because some of the questions I was writing down, she's actually answered with this little note she dropped in the chat. So perhaps one of those breakout bubbles could reference other parts of the report.
Great. I really love that idea. So now we can see some of the particular focuses of data or foci of data analysis from policies, and that that the reader's really invited to see the interplay between the sections, or in particular, I mean, some of those in theory could have moved to data analysis, but they should live in policies. There's a rich context there. So I love this idea of connecting them more explicitly for the readers. Thank you. I also, I was going to say, I would like us to leave a little bit of time to talk about ideas, vision, looking ahead for next year's report. But are there further comments about, and also public comment, of course, are there any additional comments that are coming to mind now that we've had a chance to see the presentation from DOJ and with the report? And maybe I'll add something I'd love us to think about individually and then collectively at the board meeting are if there were an executive summary or in particular a brief graphics handout. Some years we've had just a 1 or 2 page summary. It can include everything that's here. Are there particular findings or items that we think would, if you were designing a 1 page, here's what some of the data is showing us, just a few graphs, what comes to mind? I've mentioned it, other board members, the idea of looking at how searches, those really change the tenor of a stop, how searches, and in particular, how the use of consent varies among stops. And I don't know if others have thoughts they want to share now, but is this something we could be thinking about collectively? The idea of some kind of graphic or summary. And maybe this will be part of board discussions about, what these reports then, like to what end do we do these reports? What are ways to really engage the public, have more public outreach and impact and input? And so something as simple as a graphical summary, I think is a real piece of that. Are there board members? Oh, please, yes.
Sorry, I think any summary could be specific to region. Like if you're a San Diego person, you're going to want to go straight to that data, and maybe perhaps when you have more time to dive deeper, you can go to other data. And also by agency, again, if you have your favorite agency that you want to look into, perhaps that could be in the summary or at least a reference to where you can find it quickly.
Fantastic. And even though historically there have been tables by agency, that doesn't really capture what I think what you're getting at. Fantastic. Board Member Diallo, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just in reflecting on a lot of the questions that were asked during the presentation and just kind of our interest in trying to understand the data ourselves, I think an executive summary that really focuses in on discretionary actions versus non-discretionary actions in a big overview in terms of how that teases out in the data in a understandable way, synthesizing that data, I think should be a key focus, and also would connect well to kind of the issues in the policy section, since that's a key focus.
Excellent. And maybe some way to do that is to pick out particular discretionary, particular non-discretionary actions. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestions. I want to make one last very quick comment because it's so related to what was just raised, and that was having a data dashboard. We haven't talked at this meeting or heard an update from DOJ, but I'm just going to say it: data dashboard, data dashboard, data dashboard. And that would really speak to the transparency that this whole enterprise really needs to achieve the public, and making the data accessible. We focus so much energy and attention and work to the report, but data dashboard, data dashboard, data dashboard. I don't know if anyone here from a DOJ is able to give a 2-line update, and then in a moment we'll move to public comment and then circle back to next steps. Even if the update is in progress, I'd love to know what's happening.
Thank you, Dr. Kajabi. And just to, I know we still have our folks from Research Services on the line, so if they're able to jump in with an update, we don't have, in terms of the attorneys and Crest, we don't have an update for you yet. The last major update with that is that DOJ is selecting a vendor. So Research Services, if you have any additional information that you'd like to share, please feel free to do so.
We don't have any information beyond that. We're continuing to work on finding the vendor, as was said, and it will be up, but it'll be a process considering all of the steps necessary to put that kind of data out publicly. But we look forward to doing it as soon as we can.
So then I think the board is raising the urgency of this, and that maybe this is for a full board priority too. That we can really understand what's happening now and what it would take to, or what a timeline would be realistically for this to happen. So I thank anyone at DOJ who's working on this, because it's really critical, and be very appreciative. And it's really it's more and more urgent as time goes on. I'd like us to pivot now to our public comment portion, and I'm going to try as best I can to see if there are folks who want to speak up. I'm not sure if the view I have of the meeting electronically will fully capture that, so I invite anyone from DOJ if there's anyone else who can see. But what we'll do is try to move from, let's say, from Northern to Southern California. Public comment is such a vital part of these meetings, so if there is anyone attending here from the public who wants to share comment with the board, and even though we don't respond individually, we're taking in notes, and it really informs our process and steps. So is there anyone from the Northern California area who would like to share comments today? And if not, that's okay, but I'm gonna, I don't see any hands, so I'm gonna move to other regions. And if I've missed a region, feel free to circle back, but is there anyone from Central California who would like to share comments today? And if so, I invite you to try to raise a hand electronically or even unmute. And then I'm going to ask if there's anyone from Southern California who wants to share a comment today. And maybe I'll say this is actually the first meeting I've ever attended where there hasn't been public comments. And I really want to emphasize, for me as a board member, that's been a very significant part of my experience on the board, to hear from the public, to hear from folks who are directly engaged in working on these issues, and also can share their personal experiences. And so, so I hope for future meetings that we'll certainly have participation. I'd like us to move to talking a little bit about next year's report that can be part of our minutes next steps now. I'm going to say it again, updates on data dashboard. So it's just out there. It could be in all caps of the minutes. It could be in boldface, but strong call for the need for a data dashboard, so that public can access and see what's happening data-wise, that you don't need specialized statistical software expertise, a public records request of some sort to really see what's happening. And law enforcement, I'll also say, goes to great efforts to collect this information. And so we need it to be as accessible as possible. Are there any board members who want to weigh in on topics of particular interest? And they can echo issues we've been working on here in the policy committee in any part of it. But Board Member Guerrero, can I invite you to start?
Yeah, I want to underscore the importance of a data dashboard. I know that there has been earlier this year, there was a special meeting to talk about that, to receive input about data dashboard. And it would be, very meaningful and also responsive to the public's call for accessible data that can help them understand what we're looking at, and is actionable for them. So yeah, triple thumbs up on that. I think that as part of our mandate, we not only need to review the data and make it available, but also make it accessible.
Thank you for that. Are there others who would like to share any particular concepts, ideas, topics of interest? And they can echo and reinforce ones that have been raised. So for example, I've heard, teasing out discretionary versus non-discretionary stops, or being able to have summaries specific to region. A data dashboard would be huge towards that, to really look regionally. Does anyone want to either amplify or reiterate any of those? And in the meantime, maybe I'll step into the void here. And I think we've heard it today. We've heard at so many meetings, the use of consent, how it might vary by agency. So looking at the way consent is used, it's clearly of great interest. It's an area where officers have a great deal of discretion, and it's an area where we have policy recommendations that really flow from the data. And so I'll just say consent as an overall umbrella, but really that evokes lots of questions, including, are there agencies that have changed practices, and do we see that captured in any way in the data? And I know some of this analysis is already happening or have happened, but I think it needs to continue to be part. So I'd like it to be part of the vision for next year's report. Duration of stop is something that's mentioned, as I said earlier, at the beginning of the stop data analysis, but it's not really part of the section. It may be, I think to some degree, maybe part of the policy section, but that is probably also a topic of great interest. I mention it because the duration of a stop, just as a search does, the duration of a stop really changes the tenor of a stop. It really can change the experience of a stop. And we have, data that's being collected about this. We want to get a picture in. Board Member Chauncey, I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you, Lily. So I know this year in the data, there's a disaggregation by mode of or pedestrian versus cyclist versus motorist. I think at some point in the future, it would also be helpful to disaggregate pedestrian for people that are using public transportation, because in many jurisdictions, depending on like how the geographic structure is laid out and the nature of policing, there can be a lot of stops disproportionately occurring for people of color on and low-income people on public transportation. And it's been a significant issue in Los Angeles and also in the Bay Area. And I've been in communication with organizations that work on those issues, and it's very important. So I'm not sure if it's under the RIPA data, if it's collected that way, but I know at least at the local level, at the agency level, within their internal like non-RIPA stop information, they do collect it. And if it's possible to get some information like that statewide by agency, that could be helpful for a lot of folks to understand how things are playing out within that specific context.
Thank you for raising that. And I'll say that even though we got a view in through the, thank you, Eric and others with the slide presentation, there is, for example, a table in this year's data. For the first time, we can separate out vehicle, pedestrian, and bicyclist. And there are just some descriptive statistics about search rates and discovery rates relative to those categories of driver, pedestrian, and so on. But it doesn't let us get a window into public transit. And so even if that's something that we can't reach into very explicitly with the RIPA data, I appreciate the idea of a discussion about this, and maybe that's a good intertwining with the policy section as well. So thank you for that. So I heard that as type of stop, in particular for pedestrians, and in particular for those on public transit. What is the experience? Board Member Guerrero, I saw your hand.
Yeah, with regard to transit, my understanding is transit officers are not defined as peace officers under state law, and so they're not collecting stop data, and so the only way we would see that that intersection would be if police are contracted to be transit officers or they are engaged in that work, but we won't see it through the transit officers. Mm-hmm. That could be something for our consideration, thinking about law changes or regulatory changes down the road. But it is unfortunate that we can't see that. I think it is something that would be worth seeing.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. I guess it does, a companion to it is the pedestrian stops that happen, getting a geographic snapshot of where they're happening, even if they're not happening literally on public transit. We still might see there's more to tease out about the experience of pedestrians than we've had a chance to in this particular report. And this is the first year that we can disaggregate these categories. I appreciate those comments so much. I wanted to share one more. So let's see, consent duration. Oh yes, longitudinal analysis. This is something that also might already be happening in the policy section, but I want to raise it to think about at a minimum next year would be the second year that we could separate out drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists. Are there ways we can really think about capturing, is any change happening? And if so, where? So longitudinal analysis, I'll just say broadly without specifying particular research questions. Are there other board members who want to take this opportunity to raise particular items they think are of importance, not just for this year's report, but looking ahead? Or something we've missed?
Yes. And in other subcommittees, we talked about this a little bit, but given the fact that there's a 1-year lag in the data that's in the report versus the data that's collected, for the future, it would be helpful, given the significance of the issue right now in California and around the nation, to try to see what we can do to dig into whatever information is available in regards to interactions with police and immigrant communities.
Thank you for that comment. And that reminds me that, something unique to this year is that as a full board, we're going to meet twice. And in particular, because of the urgency, this was raised at our last full board meeting. to have a meeting dedicated to really understanding and talking about what's happening on the ground in California with ICE and law enforcement. Thank you so much for raising that. I appreciate that. Other comments, concerns, suggestions? And if not, we can share. I don't know if we need a motion to adjourn. I feel like I want to say the words data dashboard out loud one more time.
No need for a motion to adjourn, but just to make sure if there are any other thoughts board members have before we let you all go. And also a reminder, we do have upcoming subcommittee meetings. So next Wednesday is the policy subcommittee meeting from 2 to 4 p.m. And Co-Chair Kajabi, as you mentioned, there are 2 October full board meetings. The October 9th board meeting from 9 to 1 is focused on discussing the interactions between law enforcement and immigration and immigrant communities. And then there's the October 16th board meeting, which is also from 9 to 1, focused on discussing the draft 2026 report. But with that said, if there are any other thoughts from board members and next steps, to preview for you all the October 16th board meeting regarding the report, we will be looking for any final edits that you may have or final thoughts on the draft as we get into the publication phase. So this is the last opportunity as a subcommittee to discuss anything else that you might want to see in this year's report or any edits you want to make. But if there's nothing else that comes to mind, we can always refer back to this recording in the meeting minutes and take all of your feedback into account for that October 16th draft.
Thank you for that. I appreciate, so thank you to DOJ for this, as usual, I should say, but that's not to trivialize it, the heavy lift of producing this work, the analysis, and for the presentation today. And I think the comments we shared earlier really reflect particular points of interest or concern, including, I just want to circle back to the co-occurrence analysis, really clarifying what is the story that the data is telling, what is it letting us learn, and that somehow isn't inadvertently muddied through the numerical presentations. I'm not sure the best way to put it. As a mathematician, I'm a big fan of the numbers, but these numbers are telling us a story about people, and we want to make sure that the findings are very clear. So thank you all. I think on this note, we're probably ready to adjourn, and look at us. We're down to we've got 4 minutes left. We did pretty well today, so I thank you all. Maybe I'll also invite committee members. If you see anything in the report, I don't know, typos, anything, it's always helpful if you're writing something to have an extra pair of eyes. So you should feel free, I think, as usual, to reach out to DOJ individually. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Kajabi. Please do, any board members with comments, edits, suggestions on the report draft, please do reach out to us. You can reach out to either myself or Alex Simpson, or you can reach out to the AB 953 inbox. We're always happy to hear your feedback, and we will work to incorporate that into the draft report. We do encourage you to submit that feedback sooner rather than later, so we do have time to incorporate that. But please do feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. And I really look forward to seeing the next iteration that might include some of these bubble or other highlighted comments. And I thank you so much. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And I think we're adjourning. Great to see you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.